Welcome, everyone. This is the DSO Study Club. I am Bill Neumann, and thank you for joining us today. I appreciate it. It is the middle of the day or later in the day on the East Coast, but I appreciate you taking time out of your work schedule to join myself and Teresa Williams here. Teresa, thank you for being on the webinar.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Bill. I'm excited to be here and to get to talk about one of my favorite subjects. It's integrating the people that we work with the technology that helps drive patient care. And so thank you for having me.
Great. We're going to let everybody, give you like a minute or two for people to file in, and then we're going to get things started. I'll go through a little bit of the rules of the road here for the next hour, but this will be recorded and it'll be up on our website and on our YouTube channel about an hour after we finish up. So you'll have access to the recording. We will send out an email also to everyone tomorrow and give you a link if you happen to forget that, a link to the recording. And this is filling chairs and scaling smart. So we are going to talk a lot about technology and how Teresa and her team at Dental Express have really been able to leverage technology. And we're having some really interesting conversations before we started the webinar about how things have really changed when it comes to technology and being able, and I think it can be overwhelming for a lot of DSOs as well. Where do you start and what are the options? And you don't want to necessarily be too early to adopt, and you don't want to be too late to the show either. Also, please ask your questions. So we got a bunch of great questions that came in. We had almost 100 people registered for this webinar, and 50 plus questions from registrants. A lot of them were very, very similar, so we were able to trim that down. There will also be polls that we will be asking during this webinar here. And in fact, maybe what we will do now, I'm going to stop the screen share for the time being, and we'll jump back in towards the end with some links if you want to reach out to Teresa or Henry Scheim One, who's kind enough to sponsor this webinar. But we'll do this right now. So there's no screen share anymore. It's just Teresa and I for the next 45 minutes or so, having a panel discussion here about things. Teresa, well, actually, before we get started with you, here is the first poll question. So we want to just know this is an easy one. Everybody should be able to answer this. So this is actually just the number of practices you have, and whether you're a DSO or you're a private group practice or you're a solo practitioner, let us know. And then once we get good amount of people that have participated in this, I will end the poll and then I'll share it with everybody so we have an idea. Teresa and I were predicting that I was thinking it was going to be 4 to 10 was going to be the answer, but I think I might be proven wrong here. What were you thinking the same thing, Teresa? Or?
I was thinking that's usually the space in which you're starting to scratch your head and look up and what else is out there? What am I missing? I've heard some very respected colleagues refer to it as the dark tunnel. But usually in that 4 to 10 space, you're starting to know, I'm going to need a little bit of help here. And so we do see a lot of people come and visit us. That being said, there are a ton of new graduates that want to be in that practice ownership space that are seeking more information out early. And I'm proven wrong here. Look at this 1 to 3 seems to be leading.
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking 4 to 10,
Mhm.
and it looks like 1 to 3 dominated. A couple folks with 21 plus and that 11 to 20. So, all right, great. That gives us a really good idea, and I think also Teresa can kind of speak to the individual audiences, because I'm sure as you scale up, and we can talk about this, you have different needs, and when you're 1 to 3 versus 4 to 10, or even larger than that. So Teresa, why don't you, if you wouldn't mind, tell the audience a little bit about your background and maybe a little bit about Dental Express.
Sure thing. So, My name's Teresa Williams. I am currently serving as the CFO and COO to a small DSO in Southern California called Dental Express. I've been in this space this is my 29th year. And I've been in the DSO space long before we called it DSO. Early in my career, we were called not corporate. And that's how you refer to yourself when you shared that you managed multiple locations or that you had common ownership over multiple locations. And so we had some dark tunnels of ourselves there, even as an industry. Mostly done most of my work in the de novo space. So where we have to build it from scratch, establish systems, select our software, select our technology, and look to duplicate and replicate that as we open additional practices. I'm originally from Oklahoma and got I say I've been working on the railroad for 20 years because we started Dental Depot. We built that in that part of the country and then came out to San Diego to build Dental Express. I also serve as I'm an empty nester, so extra time on my hands. I serve as a coach with Dental Science Alliance. And so I do work with practices that are wanting to grow their practice and grow their DSO. In this space. So I help do consulting through the Dental Science Alliance as well.
And we'll make sure that people have access to your contact information at the end of the webinar. So if they need to reach out to you for coaching or just have some questions about what we discuss today on the webinar, they can get those questions answered. And actually, if you do have questions as we have this discussion, feel free in the Q&A section just to shout out those questions. And if we can't get to those questions, during the live webinar, we can certainly follow up afterward. But a lot of these questions that came in from the registrants is when they registered. There's a lot of themes here. There were we had 50 questions and we probably had about 10 questions, and we were able to kind of, that had very similar themes. And a lot of it is around AI. Of course, everybody wants to know AI, using AI and how that can help with operations and, how to determine who might be the best partner for you when it comes to some of these companies, because there are so many solutions. I don't know how, Teresa, you do it. Maybe you could talk about that. How do you determine who to even partner with? We start at the top, though. Growth challenges and technology adoption. You have a couple there. You have two hats, right? COO and CFO. So what were some of the biggest operational challenges you faced or are still facing as you scale up Dental Express?
So I would say the behavior of the humans that's involved, will continue even with adopting technology, passing off some of our duties to actual computers to work on through AI. But working with the actual people, whether we're talking about the people working in our practices or we're talking about the patients, patient behavior has shifted as technology shifts. And 5 years ago, or let's go back 6 years ago, let's go pre-COVID. Could you ever imagine your grandmother filling out an online form to go to their dental appointment? Not something in a million years I would have ever tasked our practices to do. I would never have looked at that. But we learned pretty quickly that if my grandma can order Chipotle through a QR code, she might be able to complete her forms online. And we're seeing greater adoptions by demographics that we didn't expect to be able to adopt technology. So if one good thing came out of that experience for us as an industry, it's we got braver with technology. We saw an acceleration of adoption through all platforms, through all industries. And I think we've been beneficiaries of that. Because it's not something in 2019 I would have ever considered, seeing, if our baby boomers were going to be prepared to adopt these technologies in our practices. So that patient behavior and the humans there, that's an operational challenge. Helping shepherd them through those things. And I say shepherd them because, we're not forcing them, but we are trying to help guide them to adopting technology and to trusting the technology. We're bringing these AI solutions in and we're looking, for partners in the operatory even. It was a big deal to teach them how to teach our doctors and our hygienists to build trust with patients. Now we've got to pivot. How do we build trust where they're trusting not only me, with this technology. I'm using AI, or I'm using digital scanners. I'm using different ways to provide their care than we did in the past. And, we've got to trust it first. And so I'd say that that's a huge operational challenge, is our own mindset.
I think that, that's great. I'm going through some of the questions here, and that was one of the questions that came in from one of the registrants. You answered it pretty well, but again, this was what the question was. How do you think about introducing and supporting a new technology and having the practice embrace it? So there is that probably fear, and hey, I don't understand how this is going to impact my role. I'm concerned that maybe I'm not going to be able to work with this new technology because maybe I'm not in my mind as an employee, not tech savvy. So do you have like a formula for how when you bring something in to one of your practices or to the group, how do you handle that?
So I look at this as, and I work closely with my partners that I'm buying the technology from. And I'm really clear with them with whatever we're looking at. Our most recent adoption was for patient experience technology. And it's that, and I tell our salespeople, you're going to need to sell this twice. So the first time is you're going to sell it to our C-suite and the people in the boardroom and the ones that are making the decisions. So, we're looking at, how does this impact our patient care? How is it impacting EBITDA? How is it, is it going to reduce expenses somewhere, raise revenue? We're looking at what levers it's pulling from the back of the house. That's the first time we've got to sell it. Then the second time we've got to sell it is after we've made the decision to buy. So even if I have, key decision makers like our chief clinical officer, hygienist, if we have some key decision makers that have opted in, if this is a good idea, we've got to go sell it to the lowest common denominator user in the practice. And you're not going to sell the product or the technology to that person using the same words or the same reasons I chose to buy it, or not the same reasons that my patient care coordinator is going to be a raving fan about it. They don't care about my analytics that I can see across all locations, or that I'm benchmarking against everyone in the country. That's not something that's going to make a hill of beans of difference to that person in their day-to-day life, or in how they care for the patient. So when it's time to go sell it to your organization, even if you've made the decision to buy, I say, shut your mouth about it first. And because you need to start by asking them what their pain points are with the present platform that they're using.
Yeah, great
It
point.
doesn't matter what my pain points are. I need to know what are my patient care coordinators' pain points? What are my hygienist pain points? What are my dentist pain points? Do you hate the notes platform? Do you hate how hard it is to sign things at the end of the day, or that you can't access them from home and you have to stay at the office to do your notes? Find out what their pain points are. And then you begin the conversation there. How is this change going to help address those pain points for them?
That ties into a degree with that question that we just had that came in live about pain points. This question was a little bit more about you as a decision maker. What do you believe is the most important pain point or need that you have? Because like you said, it's different. Yours is different.
Mm-hmm.
You probably are super interested in those analytics, so you can benchmark and
how quickly can I add a new practice? Can I set a new practice up in a matter of minutes versus days? How quickly is the transition if I'm in an acquisition? Those are things that we are looking at that are so important to us. Can I plug in and look at a practice I'm considering, but then be able to pull them right back out again? Those are super important to me, but they are not important to that end user. So, there are different pain points, and, you can't bring that into the practice, the reasons that you bought it, if it has nothing to do with how they're going to do their job. So once you've kind of sold it to them and they are excited about the transition and how it's going to solve some of their problems, you work to find champions, both in the front office and the back office. These champions will support your training to their peers. They're going to support this through your go live, your first week, and then even post-launch. Champions are very important to the success of any endeavor, whether it's a technology endeavor or even just a process endeavor. Without people that are championing in your absence, you'll find attrition. You'll find them going back to, they're trying to make a square peg fit in a round hole and make it do what the old software did.
Let's run another poll real quickly here, and then this is going to lead into our next topic, but this is a good one. Methods to acquire new patients. So you can select all. So it doesn't have to be just one. You can start to answer this by, there we go. We got some people jumping in now. So you can check all the boxes if you want. If you're only doing one, we have methods to acquire new patients, SEO, paid search, paid social, or content marketing.
While people
I'm
are
one.
answering that, Bill, it made me think about, if you'd have asked me this question 20 years ago, it would have been four completely different answers. And it makes me wonder, what are the four answers going to be 20 years from now? 20 years ago, we were looking at the yellow pages, the bus benches, and, the banners outside the office, your sign. These were the main ways that people came into your practice. And those aren't even on the map anymore.
Interestingly enough, do you have a prediction on what would be the number one choice?
Number one, I'm gonna say is a paid search.
Paid search. Close. That's tied for. I'll share this with everybody. This is interesting. So SEO, so which does make sense for the website
Mhm.
for sure. Probably
Mhm.
have a company that they're working with that is ensuring that they have the best SEO. Paid search was tied for second with content marketing, which I find which helps with SEO,
Yes.
of course. So they are tied together. But yeah, great. This is great information. Okay, we will we'll move on. Very interesting. Paid social, only 38%. I find that kind of fascinating. I thought there'd be more of that.
I don't think we do, and I would say I see specialist practices doing a really great job in that social space. And especially your orthodontic practices, they have that figured out. They know who their customer is and how to reach them. I think we still are a little challenged at trying to reach out and be engaging to our customers, and to our patients in that social space. And I think we're going to see improvement over time as our Gen Zs graduate from dental school and they begin to be practice owners. I think we're going to see a big swing there. And I'll admit it, it's not something I'm overly comfortable with. And so I think a lot of my contemporaries own these practices, own these smaller DSOs, and maybe are struggling with comfort in that space too.
Give a little feedback in the Q&A. A solid COA and great analytics plus a marketing calendar. So there's some more
You're right, Ray.
answers. There you go. Nicely done. All right. So as we move on, optimizing booking and scheduling. Again, we were having some conversations about this before we started the webinar. No shows, cancellations, big issue for any group, a lot of practices. You talk a little bit about strategies and maybe some of the tech that you're leveraging to kind of minimize the impact of no shows.
So, and I love what you said there. You didn't ask about minimizing no-shows, Bill. You asked about minimizing the impact. And if we can get our arms around that and get our mind around that we are in a I want it now society, and people are making decisions right away. You're able to access, if I wanted a massage 30 minutes from now, I could go into an app and get it. And you're able to get things right away. And they're viewing dentistry very much like that open table reservation, that I want to be able to go get it now. And might not be able to go. So we don't have that same level of respect for an appointment that we made 6 months ago, that I'm gonna just do that, because so many more things are taking our attention, and we have so many more things that we could be doing. So we're not necessarily going to see our industry minimize no-show cancellations as much, but minimizing the impact. We could take a lesson out of the airline industry. We can take a lesson out of looking at how do they look at their analytics? How do they know how many tickets they need to sell on my Southwest Airlines flight? Because they know. It's rare. I will tell you, it's rare that I'm at the gate and I'm hearing them talk to people about coming and getting bought out of their ticket. Happens sometimes. Occasionally it happens, but
Not like it used to. So
usually it's
they're dialed in. You're
close.
right.
They have it really dialed in. And how they do that is through analytics. And Jarvis Analytics has a phenomenal scheduling tool that we've been using in our practice as soon as they launched it. And it allows me to look at appointment capacity. So I can take that data from appointment capacity and marry it with my no-show cancellation percentages to know exactly how many appointments need to be booked in a day for my practice to produce the goal that it has for that day. And you get it dialed in even more carefully with other AI tools in your phone analytics. So what times are people calling me? What times of day do we have more no-show cancellations than others? Maybe I need to book 6 appointments at 8 o'clock because I know that that's happening more often, but I'm going to book 4 a little later. So you get your templates super dialed in, and you're able to layer these things on top of each other to not get a perfect day schedule, because that perfect day schedule that we had in the late 90s, early 2000s, where we had these great rocks and sands and pebbles, if there's any old timers in here, that we had this perfect day schedule and everyone came and it worked out great. We have to be more flexible, more malleable. So knowing when new patients are going to come at what times and what are our high volume is going to allow me to book enough patients to not lose my mind if 10% of them don't come. And getting our providers' minds around that of, what, just love on them next time they're in your chair. Because how we treat people, how we form those relationships means they are going to come back, because at some point they do need a dentist and they are going to need to return. And you want to be the place that they return, so they don't go become someone else's new patient because you sent them a nasty gram and said, don't ever come back. If we accept this is how it's going to be, we can plan our business around it. We can reduce that impact. And since we started using that scheduling tool to schedule our practices appropriately, we're finding they're producing their goals. And this last minute no-show or cancellation isn't causing us to be overstaffed in a practice.
Can you share how you're connecting to Google and doing online bookings and scheduling and the results you've seen? Because this is something, again, another thing we recently talked about, and I didn't even realize that you could do this. So technology, it really is rapidly advancing. So go ahead, Teresa.
So I saw a lot of people seem to have a good understanding of how the Google pay to click or the SEO and how that all works. So you probably understand you have your Google My Business listing. It's showing up on the right-hand side whenever you are Googled or your dentist near me is Googled. If you're lucky, you get to show up over there with a little map. Well, with Jarvis Scheduler, not only does it show up over there, it also shows up with Book Now and shows next appointments. So patients are able to see really quickly that they've got a next appointment available. So we utilize that Jarvis scheduler in that way, and they're booking directly from our Google listing. So there's, as much as I'd love for them to come see my website, I'm more interested in them booking an appointment. And so I'm removing the number of clicks between them needing a dentist and booking in my practice. And so we've seen an increase in online booked appointments in that respect. And the other thing I like about that tool is I got to customize it. In our practice, when we take a new patient intake over the phone, my patient care coordinators are not allowed to talk about payment or payer information or collect personal information about the patient beyond their name until the end of the appointment, end of the call that the appointment's secured. And so my online booking tool is now mirroring that. We're talking about when you can come in, when you want to come in, what's going on with you, before I'm asking you to tell me your insurance information and asking you for your address. And so you're able to customize when that happens during the booking process. We've seen that we have a lot less fallout than a previous booking tool that we used. Because before, when we were asking, tell me your name, Bill, tell me where you live, what's your insurance? Now I'll tell you if we have an appointment. That feels kind of gross. That feels kind of wrong of how come I had to qualify with insurance before I could know when the appointment is. I don't even know if I want to come to your office. And flipping that script and showing them it's going to be easy to come in. We can get you right in tomorrow if you like to. Why not? Here's my insurance card. Let's go. It has the image capture. That image capture is bringing data right into my cloud-based process management software, bringing that data in, and then the eligibility features are taking over and doing real-time eligibility. So I've removed all of these pain points and steps from my patient care coordinator's life so they can really focus on filling the schedule with treatment that we've diagnosed.
It's pretty cool. I mean, you go from, some practices and maybe even some groups that, don't have the ability for somebody to book online. So they still have to call or email to having to go to somebody's website to possibly book online. And now you're saying just through search, I find Dental Express in San Diego, and I see that you've got an availability at 11 o'clock tomorrow, and I can just book right then and there. So it's a totally different experience.
Yeah, and the patient feels more in charge, which if in any great practice, you've made the patient feel like they're a shared decision maker and they're in charge the whole time anyway. And so why wouldn't we build our technology tools to make them feel that way? So when you make them feel in charge and that you're there helping them along the way for their own healthcare, you're building that trust, which is so paramount to a long-standing relationship between a provider and a patient.
This is a really good question that came in from Sandra. Teresa, do you have some thoughts around this?
How are you able to do that when a lot of callers' first question is, do you accept my insurance? So you are correct. That's often a question that callers have. And, it it is something that in the event that, if we're doing online booking and they're looking for the appointment, a lot of our patients are operating on the under the assumption that yes, we do. Or it is listed on our website that they can go if that's something that's super important to them, they can go there and they can get that information. If I'm on the phone with a patient and the caller first question is, we use a method and it's taught by a very good friend of mine, Genevieve Poppy. Probably many of you have learned this. We use the Poppy method and we put a pin in their question and we get to know the patient a little bit first. And it's a technique that we get to know them a little bit. And then we say, now tell me about this Delta Dental you've got. Tell me about your plan. And we get back to that we first build the relationship. What's going on with you today? Who can we thank for referring you? We've got to build some warmth in that conversation, because if we don't take Delta Dental, maybe we're not providers and we've gone out of network. We're just dead in the water. The patient doesn't even have the opportunity to fall in love with me and pay out of network yet. And so we do try to bring that conversation in a little bit later after we've gotten to know the patient a little.
So in that Google business listing, do you have something that says you accept most insurances, or in a case where like Sandra has here, if somebody's really concerned about that, they would have to take the next step and jump
Mhm.
to your website, and then from there they can
And
schedule.
and we honestly haven't seen that be a huge barrier for patients in our market. That if they get all the way in and we see that we don't take their insurance, we'll call and have a conversation with them. But we don't want to make most of our patients feel disqualified for the once in a while when that happens.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, let's jump to another poll question here. These are always fun. This one is the biggest challenge when scaling. So this is, what is your biggest challenge when scaling your multi-location practice, or if you just have one location, what's your biggest challenge? I think we'll probably be able to predict this one. I think of course, I get to see this in real time on my end as it moves around. So maybe it's
Fun.
just yeah. Here we go. Let's get a couple more people responding to this. There we go. I got some people. Um, Give it another 30 seconds, but the options are managing operations across locations, hiring and retaining staff, insurance and revenue cycle management, tracking and analyzing business performance, implementing and integrating new technologies. And we're talking about all that on this webinar, so this is great. Okay, this is, yeah, all right, this is good. We're getting more feedback here. I think I'll give it, yep, all right, one more person. And I get one more answer. All right, this looks good. I think we've got everybody here. So let's take a look at the results. This is not surprising. This is what
Not
I thought.
surprising at
Hiring and
all.
retaining staff still a huge challenge.
Yeah. And I would say, you start to get your arms around that challenge. It helps. It's a driver to success in the other four areas, Bill. That having the right people who champion your values and who believe in your vision, they're paramount if you're going to implement a new technology, or if you're going to try to scale and have replicatable operations across multiple locations. Your people have to believe in what you're doing. And if you find that the core people in your team are kind of fighting everything that you're doing, or resentful or rejecting things, they may not be the right people on the bus. They may champion someone else's vision better. And those are some of the harder things that we see in that 4 to 10 practice space, is the type of individual it took to get you there to number 4 is not the type of person that may be able to effectively lead you to practice number 12. And, kind of looking at the seasons in your business and planning for that up front. In order to hire and retain on that level for 10 practices, you have to have a different mindset and a different type of individual.
Very, very valid points. And 50% said it was hiring and retaining staff. Second, kind of a distant second, is managing operations across locations. Certainly a challenge, and we'll be addressing that as well. Data-driven decision-making. Let's move on to that topic. How are you using data generated from your practice analytics, really is to help you optimize your scheduling? And we always talk about filling the chairs, but you discuss your strategies there.
So we talked about the data around number of appointments that we need to see in a day, and then we have the data around what times of day. We've utilized data to look at when we're going to be open. What grew DSOs in, I would say, from 2000 to 2020 was, being accessible, be open on Saturdays, be open at 7, stay open till 7. We found a niche there where we could go in and compete with private practices by just being open all the time. And then after COVID, we experienced, the great exodus of skilled labor in our practice. And we had to start to pivot about how are we going to possibly, meet our profitability markers that we're looking at, be able to pay higher wages, still be able to care for these patients. So we began to start to look at what times of day are patients really needing to come in, and they really want to come in. And the data was starting to prove out that we didn't have to open so early in the morning. So we were able to offer better flexibility to our teams. Our data proved out that, that 8 o'clock appointment in most of our practices had a high degree of cancellation, no-show. I also was fighting employees that were always late. They were always late, Bill. So if the patients weren't late, the employees were, if anyone bothered to come at all. So when we looked at that, and we moved our start time in many of our practices to 9 a.m. based on what the data gave us. That trimmed a whole hour of labor off. So if you're running 100 locations, that can be a pretty significant number. If your chairs are not already full the rest of the time anyway. What we got back from the practices and from the employees were, I get to take my kid to school now, or I get to go to the gym. I don't have to have traffic. It was very well received from a retention standpoint, not only from my hourly workforce, but from my doctors as well. Our doctors, they want the same things. They want more of a balance where they feel like they're getting fed first, and, it's not just work 10 hours and go home and pass out. So right. we saw that was a big piece. The other piece of data we saw in our scheduling, and this came from an AR partner we were using through Patient Prism. We were looking at our call volumes and looking at the times of day that we got the most calls. And it was happening between noon and 1. And we had the traditional go to lunch at noon, come back at 1 schedule. And more people were calling our practices at noon, from noon to 1, than any other time of the day. But we were closed. Or we had one person that was maybe sort of answering the phone by themselves. And so in a large 3-doctor practice, one person isn't going to get it done. And we were missing tons of opportunities. And we moved our lunchtime, and this was, again, talking to the team, looking at their pain points, helping sell this to them. This wasn't technology. This was a change in process. And we definitely had to go sell it to the team and to the providers. What if we took lunch at 1 o'clock instead? And we moved that to 1. We started capturing more phone calls and getting more productivity. And it turned out to work out very nicely and more balanced for our patient care. We weren't just coming back to things starting to fall apart. We were able to better pivot to, rescue a 4 o'clock cancellation because someone was still working there at noon.
That's great. So you moved so you initially started at 8 in the morning, and you moved it to 9, and then you moved the lunch hour. Well, it makes sense that people would be calling because it's probably their lunch hour in a lot of cases. So that's when they're doing things like making appointments
and it wasn't something we did from feeling. It wasn't something we just heard at a conference. The data proved it out, and we couldn't ignore it when we looked at this data, and it was provided to us through our technology partners. And It's not something that would have been very cumbersome to try to go count and remember. And I remember the days of call logs of how many calls did you take today to the front desk person, and they don't have to tell me those kinds of things. I can go pull that information on my own.
All right, this is part of the data-driven decision making, KPIs that you're using to track. I would say daily KPIs to track your operational success.
So, my favorite KPI that I think is the biggest driver in a general dentistry practice, and this is going to work differently in your specialty practices than your general dentistry or in your pediatric practices even, is going to be same day care. Are you measuring the percentage of same day care? If you do 4 exams in a day, how many of those patients are you initiating some type of care on? And in our business, if we're at 25% same day care, so if we did 4 exams, one for every 4 exams we're doing, one patient is getting some type of care that day that they hadn't planned on, and we're seeing success with those providers. And that's a metric that our providers learn to look at really quickly. And it's, and if you're falling below that, are you overscheduled? We find sometimes we've overscheduled our providers. They have so many hygiene checks to do, they can't see the forest for the trees. And we've become great hygiene practice, but there's no time for the doctor to start anything for anyone because they've got to go kiss all the babies and shake all the hands in hygiene. So we look at that same day care metric if we're keeping them right at around 25% for every 4 exams they're doing. And it's not like we're doing something huge. We're not doing a full mouth reconstruction same day,
Sure.
But when you start something for a patient, whether if they need a root canal, maybe you did the open and med, or, if it's a child that needed sealants, we went ahead and knocked the sealants out that day. It's usually something small to initiate, or we took that tooth out that was bothering them, something that isn't going to wreck our schedule, but it makes a huge difference to the patient. On your new patient specifically, if you don't initiate some type of care really quickly on them, you may not get to be their dentist. You are somewhere they got their teeth cleaned that one time. And when you actually do care for someone, you get to be their dentist. And so that's why we do see that driver building these new practices and building the profitability of them.
Moving on to cloud-based solutions and scaling. So you chose a cloud-based PMS over a server-based system. You did have a server-based system. I think you were saying during COVID, right? This wasn't that long ago. So talk a little bit about that decision and kind of the why behind it and how how that went, that transition.
So my personal journey to select a cloud-based system, I chuckle when I look back at her and how she thought, this pre-COVID Teresa who had all these years of success in running dental groups. I was really good at my server-based software. I'd known it for 20 years. I knew it through and through. My team knew it. It wasn't broken except for it was just hard to get into and hard to pull data together. And I probably spent 2 or 3 years trying to convince our cloud-based management partners to make it look like my old system. Well, if you could just make it do what this one does in the cloud. And those of you that are listening or watching, I'm sure you've had similar sentiment. If you just can make it do what this does in the cloud, don't make me have to change. Even if it's more efficient to do it the other way. We did rip the Band-Aid off during COVID. We had a lot more downtime. If we're going to convert, this is going to be the time to do it. And we went with Dentrix Ascend. And one of our biggest reasons for going with Dentrix Ascend is they started partnering and talking to us years before we adopted the solution. They really dug into what our pain points were. And our practices provide them Medicaid services in the state of California. And the state of California has its own language and its own claim forms. And honestly, there was not another provider that was interested in getting in that game. And they stepped up. Henry Schein One stepped up and said, we're going to learn it. We're going to be a premier provider. And they've been a true partner with us along that way. And, to where, things we never would have been able to do electronically, in this platform wouldn't have been possible in the server base. And there were transition steps along the way, however. I was still running DSOs prior to having a cloud, and I needed solutions that were not manual to look at practice performance across locations. And so if you're not in the cloud and you're thinking about this, I would highly encourage you to get an analytics platform and lay it on top. laying something like Jarvis on top of your existing server platform is going to prepare you and your team to start looking at this information differently. You know, you can start to use online booking. You can start to utilize some of the things that are available in the cloud, you know, in what I would call a hybrid and with your server-based platform, you know, because we weren't converted yet when COVID hit, but we had an analytics platform that allowed us to see our schedule, allowed us to see patient contact information. We were not dead in the water at home. We were able to pivot and get patient care coordinators on the phone to talk to patients, even without them being able to VPN.
I think that leads right into the next poll question here. Current technologies. So this is multiple choice. So please ask or please answer with as many as you'd like. Like you said, you could have it'd be a hybrid situation where you've got your analytics, which is cloud-based, and a server-based PMS. Let's take a look and see what we have here. How technologically forward is this? Are the attendees? Should be one, none of the above, right? We should have one of those.
I wish we had a poll on who's online booking and who's not. You know, that's always a surprise.
Yeah, that would be great. That should be on here. Yeah. Okay, I think we are. How many do we have here? Give her one more. All right, got one more person that just answered. All right, let's take a look at what we have. Do you have any predictions on what will be the number one answer?
So I think we're going to see a lot of people with double answers, but I bet we're 50-50 cloud and server. No?
No? Let's see.
Okay.
70-30 or 69-31.
We have a more savvy group here. Congratulations, everyone.
Yeah. Revenue cycle management software is in there, 31%. Real-time analytics, 44%. AI diagnostic tools, 50%. That's a high. That's great.
Mm-hmm. And I would say in selecting your partner, if you're not in the cloud yet, you notice Bill had several things in the poll here. And how many of those items are already integrated into a cloud that you purchase? So if it's already integrated, you know, then you're not going to have many different platforms to manage. You know, if your cloud-based software is really great at running RCM for your team, you know, that's a bonus. That's a value add, a value win. And when we went to the cloud, we were purchasing a lot of technology. We had a lot of standalone products that we were purchasing to make our server-based software, you know, work and be more sophisticated and be scalable. And we went through and looked at, well, we won't have to pay for this anymore. We won't need this one because it's already here. And that was huge for us with Ascend, as it was, you know, called kind of this all-in-one solution.
Well, we got a flurry of comments and also some questions, but I want to go through this real quickly because you did kind of throw that question out there about people. Is anybody using an online booking? So we use online booking, but only for existing patients. We are online booking with ODE services. Okay, and then there's a question in here about which analytics. I think you mentioned Jarvis. I don't know if that's what Ray's referring to here or not, but.
So there's a lot of great analytics platforms out there. I've been utilizing Jarvis. We used it prior to moving to Dentrix Ascend. Our server-based platform was not a Henry Schein One product prior, but they did win us over, you know, and you know, really partnering with us to help roll it out to our team, help customize things to fit our business model. And you know, many of you seem, you know, you're like, I only let existing patients book and not new patients, or I was scared to let people book right onto my schedule. Well, what if they do it wrong? Well, here's the rub. Your team is doing it wrong. You know, and that's something that I started to see is my team wasn't getting it right 100% of the time either. And if we can build our culture around being flexible and around being understanding, and if our goal at the end of the day is to help more patients, online booking was providing an avenue to that. Getting your templates, you know, I don't have patients book onto the doctor's production schedule. So a patient they're typically not going online and trying to book their own implant surgery. What they typically want to book, Bill, they want to book a recare appointment for their cleaning, which we know may or may not be periodontally involved, but they want to book that appointment. And they want to book their toothache appointment. They want to know, can you get in to service my toothache right away? And so we keep we keep a column for same day or toothache type emergencies that have these availability for patients to book right into those. And the way that we train our teams in the practice to respond is the people that come into that column, they know that their expectation isn't that you're going to give them their crown that day. They know that they're coming in to get to know you. So you have some flexibility, around getting to do this exam. And then, perhaps if your patient that was supposed to come in your production column didn't come, you could convert that to same day care. But if you don't allow this at all, your front office team, they may be gatekeeping. They may be keeping people out of your practice because they're concerned you're going to become overrun. And, we know, looking at data, looking at no-show and cancellation rates, if you don't plan to be a little bit to be overrun, you're going to be way underfunded, to be able to cover your staff costs and cover your overhead.
A couple more points around cloud-based solutions. Talk a little bit about staff onboarding and training compared to what you were using before with server-based. I mean, is there any differences?
It's night and day. So my server-based platform, which I was pretty good at. I don't know why anyone thought it was difficult. I'd done it for 20 years, but it was really challenging for our teams to learn, especially if they were new to dentistry and they didn't know what software should do for you anyway. It was taking weeks to months to help someone become proficient in our server-based software. And it was very important before, when we were recruiting, we would look at, do they have experience with this software? As a precursor to get to work here. Because if they had experience, man, okay. But if they don't, I might not want to teach them or want to have to go down that road. We are not seeing that now in the recruitment. It's not necessarily something we're seeing. People become proficient in parts of Dentrix Ascend within hours instead of days or weeks. We're seeing them be a contributing member of our team within the first week. And the software it works a lot like other web-based software, like a Facebook, or, it's got menus that are similar to some things that they've experienced in the past. And so if we can get them to be a contributing member of our team quickly, we're losing that, first 12 weeks that it takes before someone even, is earning their keep. We're reducing that time.
Well, it also opens up the pool of people you can hire, right? They don't have to, you don't have to have that prerequisite.
Let's have Dentrix experience, or, it's, you're able to look at people a little bit differently.
Let's talk about future outlook and best practices. And then I want to get into the final 12 minutes or so we have, some of the questions that we still have from registrants that came in ahead of time. Advice for other group practices looking to leverage technology, and something that I tend to hear a lot, and I just did a podcast last night, recorded it, and one of the topics was from the dentists or the group practices perspective. Are so many options out there. So when we talk about technology, it's so broad, and then we can look at AI, and AI is pretty much in any technology. And a lot of different companies. Some have not been around a lot. There's a lot of startups out there, and so there's that concern: are they going to be around? And but a lot of great solutions. So I guess, what advice do you have for DSOs as they're trying to just navigate all this new technology, some great opportunities to be more productive, more efficient, communicate better with their patients, be better for their staff? How do you do all this? I mean, how do you manage this from an operations standpoint, Teresa? It's got to be overwhelming.
It is. And I go back to the people side of it. What are your relationships like? When you choose technology or technology platform, it's got to be a partnership. You have to go into understanding the software that I'm buying today will be completely different 6 months from now. And people that are in the tech side, they know that. My husband's a computer engineer, and it's great job security because he knows he's going to have to redo that software, whatever he's building, every 3 to 6 months, because of how the browser's changing, how the visuals and the video cards are working. So knowing that the software will be changing every 3 to 6 months, who am I going to partner with? What is their track record for responding to to responding to provider issues? Do your homework and talk to their customers. Look at what their experience has been. I actually, I drove 2 to 3 hours north of where I am with Henry Schein One to talk to some of their other customers that had implemented this and implemented some of the platforms I was looking at. And they stepped back and let the customer give me the good, the bad, the ugly. Like here's what worked well for us. Here's what didn't. Here's what I would do differently. And I appreciated that transparency. So I would say whoever you're going to partner with, look for that transparency. Nothing is going to work great for you 100% of the time. You got to let that go because what you're doing isn't working great for you 100% of the time. So you kind of got to let that expectation go. And is there a partner that I can work with that we're going to be able to continue to make it better? And that's where I kind of lean when I'm selecting a platform. And I've selected brand new platforms. I've been early adopters. Our procurement platform, I was one of the first 10 customers, and now they're the preferred procurement platform for Heartland Dental. So I've been an early adopter, I've been a middle of the road, and I've been a late adopter in some places. But in every time, you've got to believe in the people that you're going to be working with and know that they're listening to you and that they hear you and you have a voice.
We're about 9 minutes left. What's next for Dental Express? And then I want to get into the questions from the registrants and the audience. We've got another really good question here that just came in. Are you exploring anything right now? Are you making any decisions on technology right now that you can tell us about?
I sure am. So we just implemented the Jarvis tools for the scheduling this last year. Presently, we're implementing patient experience software, and this that measures patient experience. You have your Google reviews. You've got some other things. We're starting to get some really great analytics and utilizing AI to go in and tell us our story about who we are based on patient sentiment, and that's been a big mover for us, in our very successful practices. Like what we may have a practice that's doing $1 million in EBITDA. It's a great successful practice. And we'll see a blip and we're like, oh no, you can't have a blip in a practice that's doing that great. That's a big blip. And what are the drivers there? And so we're able to tie in that patient experience metric to our scheduling data. And this was a real-time decision we made today in a practice. We saw we were overscheduled in a practice. Our patient experience was suffering and our production was suffering, but our volume was too high. And so we pulled that lever, Bill, and we would not have been able to do that without having this data at our fingertips. We were able to make a game day decision to go in and pull back on how many patients we were going to see in this practice. And it's May 21st. I expect that we're going to pull the nose up and get right where we want to go by the end of the month because we did that.
That's great. Wow. Another question. What accounting software do you use?
We're Sage Intacct. Yep. And
Okay.
we were QuickBooks early on, but for multi-practice, paying bills from the DSO perspective, I'd say it is the Ritz-Carlton of the accounting software that you could use.
Here's a question from a vendor. So this is a good question. What's more what has more value? Is it education for you or rebates?
Ooh,
It's a tough one.
from a vendor.
Both, right?
I would say pricing is still going to be paramount in this market, so whether the price, I would say sometimes neither. I'd be like, just give me the best price. But education's going to help me. If you can build how that education is going to translate into, more dollars into the individual practices, we can see a great value add there. But I think we're probably still at rebates with my CFO hat on.
That's honest. Let me ask this last poll question here, and then I'm going to rapid fire a couple of questions from the registrants, and then I want to make sure that we've got our contact information pulled up so people can reach out to you and also reach out to Henry Schein One. So just a quick question from Henry Schein One. If you want to learn more about the solutions, yes or no, super easy. I'll launch this, and then we'll while you're actually responding to this, we will go into some of these questions here. We didn't really touch much on revenue cycle management. So, how about one of the big topics of conversation? I think, it's between AI, and, we think of the buzzwords, right, for the year. AI is probably one, and RCM two. They kind of, and then probably last year as well. Tell us a little bit about RCM. Are you using any technology for revenue cycle management?
So we utilize a lot of the tools in Jarvis, and so we talk about AI starting to knock on that door. Our tools, we still need better, whether it's in your cloud software or their better denial tracking. It's still very manual, and that's got to improve. I think we've removed a lot of the noise into where we can see how long it's taking to get a claim paid. We're able to see that, time to payment. We're able to see if claims are getting filed in a timely manner. So, if they're, whether they're filed in the practice or by your RCM team, you're able to see that. But the next big step is kind of looking at the denial tracking for when things are denied and why they are denied. That's pretty manual still. And when we remove all that other noise, we're able to go after the slow payers. I think there was a question, what do I see the biggest challenges in 2025 for RCM? We're seeing payers taking, they're getting right up to that minute before they're releasing payment. And because our RCM teams are so on top of things, and communicating with the payers, they'll say, oh, it's approved for payment. It just hasn't been dropped to pay yet. And so that's going to be the biggest challenge, I think, for RCM, is to continue to push those payers not to slow down that payment, because they don't have an excuse at this point. We can see everything's, our I's are dotted, our T's are crossed. But there's the other thing I've done with our analytics through Jarvis is I'll take that information, redact all the patient information out of it, and put the claims and payment data into an AI engine and have it tell me about each of my payers. And it kind of writes me a little story and talks about the payers. And there's some pretty sophisticated things you can do to analyze your own data. It's not just you looking at the data. It's I've got an extra analyst on staff, that will help analyze the data with me.
Really? This is a question that comes up a lot too. AI front desk services. So, of course, one is for scheduling. It sounds like you really kind of see you have that option, and then there's the scheduling as well. So, how do you feel about AI front desk services?
I'm interested to see how patients are going to respond to that.
Yeah.
We make fun of it quite a bit, of zero operator, I think that's a fear that a lot of us have. Is that going to be our experience? And I think as these things are becoming more sensitive, that's going to be an area of opportunity for our businesses. But again, it just like you've got to teach the front desk in your practice, your voice and your culture, you will need to teach your AI person what your voice is, what your culture is, how we, and it's what you put into it. I'm sure when it comes out of the box, it's going to sound like a robot if you don't teach it how to sound like you.
I'll do this final question here, and then I also have up on the screen Teresa's contact information. If you want to find out more about Dental Express, it's thedentalexpress.com. And Teresa, you also mention your coaching services again.
Yeah, I do coaching with about 20 other coaches through the Dental Science Alliance, and we have a great time working with our clients and on all things dental practice management, DSO, building your DSO, and scaling your DSO.
There's a question here about increasing fees. Have you done that? Or I guess the question is more about strategy to increase your fees.
Absolutely. So you should be raising your fees at least once per year. And I say at least once, it's more often is completely okay. One of the things that, and with a cloud, again, in your cloud, if you've got the same fee schedule shared across many practices, you get to go increase them with a click of a button. In our server-based platform, we had to have everyone logged out completely. It was a really big deal. It was really challenging. But I would say around that conversation, we tend to be more uncomfortable with raising our fees than our patients are. And I'll tell you this is why. You're diagnosing a crown every single day, and the price of your crown. Your treatment coordinator knows what it is, and they're like, that's what a crown's supposed to cost, because I talk about it all day long. Most people are not getting a crown every day or talking about it, thinking about it every day. They're not even getting a crown every year. And so most patients are not as tied up in what it cost last year to this year as you are. And so if you can, try to look at this different, they'll be more comfortable with a fee increase. They most likely aren't even going to notice. They don't remember exact prices. They will remember great care. They will remember the soft skills. They will remember the trust that you've built in, they've built in you. But don't be afraid to be looking at your market analysis for your fee increases. I know there's been a moratorium on the ADA being able to share that information with us. Please speak to your congressman. We need that data. But being able to see that data is important. That you want to be at least 80% in your area to be competitive. So I would say don't be afraid to raise your fees. The price of eggs is more expensive, and the price of a hygienist is more expensive, and you should be able to have a business that's successful.
Right. Great points. Great way to finish things up. Thank you, Teresa, for spending an hour with us. And thanks everybody for watching this. Remember, the recording will be available on our website, groupdentistrynow.com. And again, appreciate your time, Teresa, and thank you. Yeah, and thank you, Henry Schein One, for sponsoring this.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.